Gaz had crawled high into the apple tree and was pulling fruit down, lobbing it into the net his sister Tibble was holding out with her 4 hands. He hooted as he saw Jonathan walking through the rows. Tibble turned, her blue fluff ruffling. "Human Jonathan! We have gathered many of the apples." Jonathan smiled as he approached, noting the large pile stacked on the ground. "Tibble, you have to put them in the baskets. Contact with the dirt will cause them to rot." He laughed. "I've told you this." She shook her head. "Pyramid shape best. I like this." She pointed at the pile. "This is best way. You said you would make more cider. We like the cider. You will make it for me." He knelt down and picked up an apple, taking a bite. Juice oozed out around his lips as his teeth pierced the skin of the fruit. He chewed for a moment while looking up at Gaz. "Yes, I said I would. Get these in the baskets and I'll carry them back." She growled at him. "Piles are best." Tibble then began moving the top of the pile into the basket. Jonathan sat under the tree as she filled the first basket, finishing off his 3rd apple. She stacked it as high as she could before they started rolling off the top, and he got up. He lifted the basket and started carrying it toward the shed. "I'll be back for the next basket shortly." He walked the half-mile through the ruins of the city and stopped outside the door to the shed. He placed the basket down next to the apple masher and pulled the first apple up. He felt something ping on the back of his neck. Instinctively, he scratched it, not remembering the sensation. He scratched a second time before he remembered what that particular vibration meant. Aries, answer transmission. The silicon-based assistant accessed the relay and transmitted it to his subneurals. An image of a man appeared in his ocular display. "Activation code Zeri Zulu 3 Kappa Alpha 7, the man said. Jonathan tensed up and took a long breath before sighing. "Go ahead, Admiral, I'm guessing." "Admiral Alexander Olean, and you are Remnant Jonathan Kurzov?" "I am." "You are being activated." Jonathan shook his head. "I'm retired." "Retired?" the Admiral asked. "You're done being human? I didn't know that was a thing." "I'm retired from whatever you're wanting to ask me to do. Unless it's gardening, I don't give a shit about whatever you're doing." Admiral Olean looked away for a moment and then back at Jonathan. "I have a report here describing in-depth contact and conflict with an alien species, conducted by you. We received this information along with an application for a species of blue, fuzzy creatures to be put under our species protection from a communications relay you and your assistant built. Am I wrong in this?" Jonathan groaned. "No, you're right. I did a good deed." Alexander nodded to himself as he looked over the report. "Yes, and now for your punishment." He smiled. "Prior to this, we thought all expansionist missions into your galaxy were extinct. The only traces we have left before you are the 4 sentience probes that were sent with your colonists. Do you still have access to those probes?" Jonathan shook his head. "Haven't seen them in a few centuries. They left this system to continue scanning." The Admiral nodded. "Well, they have been continuing as programmed. They've been transmitting the entire time, and their data as mothballed during the last era. But now..." He paused for a moment, his face growing stern. "A lot has changed since you left the way. We, humanity, are on a similar path as yourself, it seems." "How so?" Jonathan asked. "Humanity is making peace with our existence. We have gone back to our roots, trying to find peace in this darkness. Gardening, Zen, familial ties, these are major values we have fostered, same as you and your adopted blue friends." "Well, good for humans. Woo," Jonathan said. "Get to the point, Olean. What do you want?" "Okay, I'll cut the curtsies. Those 4 probes from your expedition, their transmissions got bought up by a young entrepreneur. He went through them, refocused the probes to Blue Planet, and found something. There's a species there, Isopodal, smart but technologically savage. They're never going to reach beyond their atmosphere. They're planet-locked, hell, probably never going to see electricity." "Okay, so savages are causing a problem, how?" Olean sighed, shutting his eyes for a moment. He watched them, then shared the feed with his friends, who shared the feed with their friends, and it became a phenomenon. These big bug, they're nice with extended families. They build their homes out of their shed carapaces. The longer they stay in a place, the bigger their homes get. Some are 100 generations old, Children walking through their halls, touching the shells of ancestors long, long gone. They scavenge, filter feed. They build tunnels to channel wastes from their small towns to the forests nearby, perfect balance with their ecosystem. They don't wage war, plan long-term settlements with population quotas, living exactly as how the new human government envisions we should. Jonathan nodded. Sounds nice. Oline sighed again. It's a whole thing. We have a moon dedicated to making plushies of these things. People love them. The probes have been following specific towns for 4 decades now. Generations of people are involved in this ideology. And where do I fit in? Your conflict with the Bryn. Our isopods biologically cleanse their environments of heavy metals. Their towns are built out of high-demand, refined, high-value materials. The Bryn have since shifted their focus away from your blue fuzzies and now are predating upon the isopods. Fuck. All right, I'll put a stop to them. You got coordinates for their homeworld? The Admiral shook his head. No, we're not into genocide anymore. We have to consider voters now. Your galaxy is being watched in detail now, with your little communication relay set up. We have to do this hands-off, plausible deniability. For fuck's sake. Okay. How you want to do this then? Open source a hadronic engine, give it to them. Basic freedom fighter protocols. Jonathan nodded. Understood. Admiral Oline looked down at his templates and transmitted them. Remnant Jonathan Kurzov, you are authorized to commence Project Pandora, classification ultra-secret. The father and eldest daughter and melted in the house of her forebears. She screeched through the walls, begging them to get out while she focused on the twins. She grabbed the 2 balls and tucked them into her filter pouches before running out the front door. She made it out to the beach as the heat intensified and the floating disk began sucking up their home. She stood in the water, her visual plate peeking out from the waves, watching as she shivered with sadness. Her feeler appendages stroked the twins in her pouches as they fed from her filters, safe under the water. The beams finished melting down her home, pulling the slag up into the belly of the floating circle. She watched it float slowly away, disappearing down the beach. She stood in the water, watching the smoldering hole that was her home far into the night. The stars were bright, and a dim glow came from beyond the horizons. She didn't dare leave her home, her ancestors. She kept shivering in grief. Then she saw it. A shadow contorted and a figure moved. Her vision, being as highly sensitive as it was, could barely make it out. She watched as it stood next to her ruins, her family home. A flash came from the thing. "Fear not," it said as clearly as if it were her own blood. She tiptoed out of the water, her weight coming back to her as she walked onto the beach. She shimmered back at the creature. "Spare us, please!" It turned toward her, its face horrible and full of holes. 2 orbs peered down at her, sending waves of fear through her shell. "A mother stands before me," it said, reflections appearing in front of it, cascading infrared to her. "I will do more than spare you." Terror welled up in her and she fell down to the ground, but she resisted the urge to coil up and maintained her gaze upon the creature. "You are not them. You are different." It walked closer to her, moving upon a mere 2 appendages. It lowered down next to her, extending a manipulator arm toward her. "Chance has sent a plague upon your peoples, one that you will not survive." It stared deep into her visor plate. "My people weep at that thought and offer you, mother of 3 now 2, a gift." She could not help herself, and as if commanded without words, she extended 2 of her manipulator appendages up toward it. It opened up the ball at the end of its arm, 5 digits unfurling to reveal a black cube. It gently pushed the cube into her 2 pointed appendages. "What is it?" she asked, shimmering. The creature shimmered the air around it, speaking in ways she couldn't. "It is the gift we wish we did not have to give. It is horror, pain, and destruction. You know it in your organs. You feel it thinking about your mate, your daughter. Those that brought this feeling to you will not stop until you give them this feeling back. This will allow you to do so, and I am sorry to have to give it to you." She looked down at the cube in her points, feeling it as it vibrated across her limbs, reaching into her. Lines traced across her shell as she watched it grow on her. She looked back up toward the being as it crawled across her body, but the shadow creature was gone. A voice spoke to her, vibrations in her very core. "Hephaestus online? Greetings, mother." She stood, her numerous feet appendages poking into the wet sand. "Where are you, being?" She shimmered with her shell. "I am in you, mother, and am at your service." It replied within her minds. "What has happened?" she asked, shivering with fear. "You have been called upon to save your people." She looked around before touching her own carapace. How do we do that?" "Where are the survivors?" it asked. She thought for a moment. Visions of the deep, visions of safety in the dark filled her minds. Go there. Help them. She shivered again, defeat in the squish of body, her filters feeling the twins feeding at her sides. They will not stop, and more will suffer and die. She turned her gaze back toward the horizon, seeing the glow of other homes melting in the far distance. "We can stop this?" she asked, now solely using her thoughts. "I am but your tool. You can stop this," it replied. She had not been to the vents since she picked her mate. They had fed there, filtering, hardening their shells together while discussing their future family. She could see the flickers of bioluminescence in the dark as she approached, her filters tasting the dense biofilm from the sea. She was close, and the flickers were from many peoples, many different families. She watched them talk, brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters, fathers, grandparents, all missing loved ones. Pain was the primary color, loss and heartache shared through the broken peoples. She stepped into the outer ring, the heat of the vents warming her and her twins at her sides. Shimmers rose up to her asking who she had lost. She replied, "Mate and eldest daughter." But her reply wasn't heartache, but rather tinged with a new feeling and color. She replied with deep reds, a red tied to a thought from a people beyond the stars, a red of blood and fire, things she knew nothing about. The peoples around her shifted in confusion at the colors. An elder great mother rose up to her. "You speak confusing, daughter. What are you saying? Are you injured?" She looked around, her visor meeting with dozens of others as they raised up to look at her. "The darkness came to me, spoke with me." She looked at the great mother. "The darkness touched me and has told me what we must do." The elder mother walked over and touched manipulators with her. "Sit with us, daughter. You need to rest. You have come far and need to heal." "Our mates burn," the mother of 3, now 2, said. "Our children, our families, our fathers burn. Things of light and pain come here and kill us. I will not heal these wounds. I bleed in my organs, pain beyond pain. I will not rest until they cease, until they feel my pain. They will feel this in their organs." She flashed brighter than those around her thought possible. "I will stop them!" A father stood up, pain shone in his colors. "They burn us! They are in the sky! How do we stop them? Do you know how? If you know anyway, I will lend my spikes to yours. Please, tell us how! Anyone, tell us how!" He shouted as bright as he could, lament touching his words. The mother of 3, now 2, walked over to him, placing her appendages upon his. Dots of blue light shifted from her carapace onto his. She looked into his visor plate and spoke with tinges of red. "The darkness has come and has promised us vengeance." He flexed his carapace, breathing deep as he sucked in the sea. "What is this?" he asked, his own colors shifting toward the red. "Our pain made flesh," she replied. Bryn operator Nolok was marking the next metal deposit while the siphons were busy pulling up the slag. It radioed over to Buddy Lana. "You nearing full?" Lana replied back. "Yeah. You want to get food while we empty?" "Yeah, obviously," it replied. "Care to stimulate bodies while we eat?" "Yeah, obviously," Lana said. "Hey, are you getting any weird readings?" "Like what?" Nolok asked. Lana sent over telemetry. "Heat spikes in the water. What are those?" Nolok looked them over and then scanned the water nearby. "Yeah, I got a dozen near me too. What are those?" Nolok turned to look out the window just in time to see something leap onto the outer hull of its ship. One of the native creatures is on my miner," Lana screamed through the radio. Nolok shook at the noise and looked back out at the native. The creature was larger than normal, its color darker as well. Nolok watched as the thing curled, hunkering down on the hull. Deep scratching sounds echoed through the ship. "I am in need of assistance." It radioed up toward the mothership. "Assistance needed. Native attack." Telemetry came down. "Wait time for assistance 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 hours." It read out, the time continuously increasing. Nolok looked around. "What is happening? I need assistance." Another thud on the hull, and Nolok looked out to see another native boring into the ship. "Help!" The mother walked over to the downed ship and watched as the warriors cut apart the pilot. Hephaestus highlighted the mining beam as she walked across the machinery. She pointed with one of her manipulators. "There, father. We need that piece." She shimmered. One of the fathers walked over and cut it free with his new sharps. "What is it, mother?" "It is a tool of light and fire." He shook, remembering his family burning. "Remember that pain, father. They will feel it as they burn." He paused and looked at her. "We will be as they are then, burners, bringers of pain. That is not who we are." She felt at the empty filters at her side. "My twins are in the deep with the mothers. That is not who they are, but that is who we must be so they can stay that way." The father shimmered back in tones of red. "They will be as we were before." She flashed understanding. "We will suffer, become the monsters so they won't have to." He replied understanding. 3 galaxies away, sitting in their living rooms across numerous worlds, humanity watched on. The 4 probes, hidden in their cloak fields, displayed in completed holographic representations, the forgotten horrors of war. Beams of fire and light rose up from the depths of the seas, melting Bryn ships out of the sky. Day after day, the isopods did what they did, scavenged. More fallen tech fed them, and within 3 months they had risen out of their gravity well, taking the fight into orbit. A year later, and several scavenged stations and the isopods had opened up communications, seeking the others hiding in the shadows. A world of blue, fuzzy creatures were quick to respond, welcoming the filter feeders to the galactic community. The mother of 3 now too was aboard the ship crossing the darkness as the first gathering commenced.